Feminism has certain myths that it pushes in the zeitgeist. Now, these myths, of course, are not called myths. They're called social problems. These social problems, of course, are problems that principally affect educated, upscale women, which is feminism's principal demographic. Feminism, of course, does not care about mothers. It does not care about poor women. It does not care about foreign women. It cares about upscale, educated, consumeristic working women in the capital cities and major cities of the Western democracies. That's its principal demographic. And so these myths appeal to these women. These myths, as I said, are social problems, or rather, they are couched in the language of being social problems that only feminism can solve. And yet, oddly enough, feminism never presents any solution to these problems. It keeps on talking about these problems forever, endlessly, repetitively. But it doesn't put on the table any kind of solution, any practical solution to these social problems, quote unquote, which are really just myths, because they are social problems that either have not existed in decades, or they are social problems that never existed to begin with. Now, the first of these problems. The first problem with the wage gap is that there is no wage gap. And the second problem with the wage gap is there is no wage gap. Now, I'm going to talk about the United States, the laws of the United States, but similar laws are in place in Canada as well as the other Western democracies. In the United States, as of 1963, it is illegal to pay a man and a woman different wages for the same job. This was put into law in the 1963 law, the Equal Pay Act of 1963. It was further expanded to include racial minorities under Title VII, I believe, of the Civil Rights Act of 1964. Today, in most corporations, human resources departments make sure that there is no wage gap between men and women or between anybody of different races in the same job, because companies would be exposed to huge lawsuits that could potentially bankrupt it. And there are a number of government entities and non-governmental organizations that make sure to police the private enterprise and make sure that no company discriminates in terms of wages between men and women. So there is no wage gap in the United States or the other Western democracies. Number one, there is a difference between average earnings between men and women. This is true. But then when you start looking at it, it starts to become clear as to why. Now, feminists are accurate when they say that women and men earn a difference of 23%. That is, for every dollar a man earns, a woman earns 77 cents or 83 cents. It depends on several metrics that are not important for this conversation. But the point is, see, this is the average earning of working people, working men and women, full-time workers. When you start looking as to why this is the case, the reasons become obvious. First of all, men and women gravitate to different occupations. Men gravitate towards STEM fields, and in those STEM fields pay more than the occupations that women go to. Women tend to go towards the healthcare sciences and the social sciences. There are more nurses who are women. There are more doctors who are women. There are more engineers who are men. The problem is that in our current society, engineers earn more. They earn a lot more than teachers, than nurses. Now, this is unfortunate, but this is the reality of the situation. Now, there's been an enormous push to have girls go into STEM fields. I mean, you see all those programs of, women in science and all the rest of it. Now, they are trying to put women into these fields, on the one hand, for feminism's sake. On the other hand, there is a genuine sense that it would be better if there was more balance between the sexes in these fields. A third principal element is that companies that employ engineers want there to be more women engineers because that would drive down the price of labor. You see? Because part of the reason that STEM fields pay so well is that there are relatively few engineers compared to teachers, say, or nurses. Since there are few engineers, companies have to pay them more. Now, if more women became engineers, the more labor in that particular market would drive down the price of that labor, and therefore companies would pay less to each engineer that they hired. So companies have an incentive to have women join the ranks of engineers in order to push down the price with more offering, with greater offer of engineers, because there are more women in it. It would drive down the price. I mean, supply and demand, right? Women don't want to join STEM fields. They simply don't. They have the opportunity, they have the incentive, a lot of different programs that are trying to help them to join the STEM fields, but they just simply don't want to study STEM fields. They want to study other things. Now, another problem. Women and men tend to earn more or less similar amounts of money until they hit the age of 30. At age 30, women's earnings tend to go down or remain flat compared to men. The reason for this is obvious if you think about it for a minute. Women who are 30 or in their 30s decide to have children. And as they have children, they cut back on their hours. They don't work as hard. And men, paradoxically, once they become fathers, they start to work a lot harder in order to bring in the income to support the child. The woman starts fulfilling her natural biological imperative of taking care of the child to the detriment of her career, and the man starts working harder in order to bring in more resources to take care of the child. The proof of this is during their 20s, before people have children, it's not that actually men's and women's earnings are the same on average. Women tend to earn on average more than men right after college. If there was some kind of systematic discrimination between men and women in their earnings, women would be earning less right out of the gate. But that is not the case. And so far as sciences are concerned, science fields and whatnot, the STEM area, a lot of studies have been done by psychologists of creating fictitious CVs for engineering positions. The CVs are identical, except for the name. Female name, male name, and they send it out. The female CVs, even though they're identical to the male ones, get significantly more offers for a first interview than the male CVs. What does that mean? What does that tell you? It tells you that companies want to hire women. They're going out of their way. They are making more offers for interviews with women over men because they don't want to appear as sexist. They don't want to appear to be discriminating between men and women. They want to have a more balanced workforce in terms of gender. So, if you start looking at the information, you start to realize that this 77% myth, the wage gap myth, it's just that, it's just a myth. It depends on biological realities. That is, women set aside and forego their careers in order to take care of children, and men work harder in order to earn more income to take care of their child. That's the reality of the situation. That reality, that truth, feminism does not want people to see. Because if it recognizes this truth, if people realize that this is the reality and that there is no wage gap, then feminism doesn't have a reason for being. And feminism needs a reason for being because feminism needs money. It needs money for its foundations, it needs money for its institutions, it needs money for its different courses and universities and whatnot. So it has to push these myths in order to fund itself. Now, this is the first of these myths. There are more myths that I'm going to be discussing in future vlog posts, but I want you all to remember that the wage gap is a myth, but it is a needed myth. Without this myth, feminism doesn't have a reason for being. Hi, I hope you enjoyed this video, and if you did, I'd appreciate it if you hit the like button and subscribe to my channel. Thank you very much.